Welcome to our literary journey. Hello friends passionate about stories that touch the soul. Today I'm going to share with you a narrative that transports us to Brazil in 1883, where true love flourishes amid social conventions and the prejudices of an era. A story about a baron who abandons his privileges to discover what truly matters in life: family, sincere love, and human dignity. This is the story of Francisco de Almeida Serrano, who risked everything for love, and Rosa Santos, an extraordinary woman who cared for orphans in difficult times. A narrative about second chances, about how love can transform not only lives, but entire societies. Before we begin our journey, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching? I'd love to know where you're following these stories from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that like so more people can discover these literary gems that make us reflect on what truly matters. Now, close your eyes and imagine. Santa Clara do Vale, province of Minas Gerais, March 1883. The morning wind carried the perfume of yellow ipe trees when Francisco de Almeida Serrano observed his son through the mansion's fogged windows. Pedro, at 6 years old, walked through the gardens like a small ghost, his hesitant steps on the courtyard stones echoing the emptiness of his childish soul. 4 years had passed since Donna Isabel departed, taking with her the laughter that once echoed through the 40 rooms of São Vicente estate. The birth that should have brought joy had transformed into farewell, leaving father and son navigating in a sea of silence and longing. Francisco adjusted his linen shirt cuff, a gesture that had become mechanical in recent times. At 35 years old, he carried on his shoulders the weight of being baron of one of the region's oldest lineages, owner of lands that extended beyond the horizon, lord of a fortune that could not buy what he most desired: his son's happiness. The governesses succeeded each other like seasons of the year, always serious, always efficient, always distant. They cared for the boy with the same dedication with which they polished silver or embroidered quilts, but Pedro withered like a plant deprived of sunlight. That Friday morning, the little one approached his father with a crumpled paper between his fragile fingers. It was an invitation from the village school for a presentation about family, where children would talk about their homes and their parents. "Papa, all the other children have mothers," murmured Pedro, his large dark eyes fixed on the floor. "The teacher said we should talk about our family, but ours is just the two of us, isn't it?" Francisco felt his chest tighten as if an invisible hand was compressing his heart. He knelt before his son, touching his face with the delicacy of one who touches rare porcelain. "We too are a family, yes, my son. But it's not a happy family like the others," Pedro completed, and his words cut through the morning air like razors. The baron looked through the window, where workers were beginning their daily activities. He saw couples working side by side, children running among the plants, hearing the loving calls of mothers. A simple but complete life, while his palace of stone and marble remained cold and silent. It was at that moment, with his small son in his arms and the weight of solitude pressing on his soul, that Francisco understood a devastating truth. All his wealth, all his titles and lands were not worth the smile he hadn't seen on his son's lips for 4 years. Something needed to change. But what could a baron accustomed to formalities and traditions do? How could he find for Pedro the maternal love that social conventions seemed to make impossible? While embracing his son and feeling the sweet scent of his hair, Francisco could not imagine that the answer would come through a decision that would shake all the pillars of his aristocratic existence. The visiting room of São Vicente estate had transformed into a theatre of masks. The suitors arrived in ornate carriages, their silk skirts rustling over Persian carpets, studied smiles and gazes that evaluated every detail of the surrounding wealth. Donna Joaquina Vasconcelos, a 42-year-old widow, was one of the most persistent. Her black hair pulled into a rigid chignon, and her imperial posture could not disguise the gleam of greed that danced in her eyes when she observed the silver candlesticks and display cases full of Chinese porcelain. "Baron Francisco, a child needs discipline and rigorous education," she pontificated during an afternoon tea, completely ignoring Pedro, who played silently with a wooden horse in the corner of the room. "These governesses are too permissive. A boy must be molded with firmness." Widow Teresa Drummond, younger and calculating, had adopted a different strategy. She feigned maternal interest, but her gestures were cold as mausoleum marble. When Pedro approached her, Teresa would discreetly retreat, as if she feared the small fingers might stain her impeccable toilette. The worst of all was Antonia Montenegro, daughter of enriched merchants, who did not hide her contempt for the boy's emotional baggage. During a dinner when Pedro came down the stairs in pajamas after a nightmare, seeking paternal comfort, Antonia murmured with disdain, "This child is too dependent. He'll need a strict boarding school to harden his character." Francisco observed these scenes with growing disgust, realizing that none of those women saw Pedro as a child who needed love, but as an obstacle to be removed or ignored. Family pressure came in the form of Vicente de Almeida Serrano, the younger brother who managed the family business in the capital. At 28 years old, Vicente was the personification of aristocratic pragmatism, always impeccable suit, well-trimmed mustache, and a worldview where feelings were dangerous luxuries. "Francisco, you need to think like a baron, not like a melancholic father," he declared one Sunday afternoon, while they walked through the property's gardens. "Pedro will survive. Children are resilient. But our lineage needs to continue. Our business needs the stability of an advantageous marriage." "Our brother didn't survive," Francisco replied, referring to the firstborn lost in infancy. "Exactly why you can't indulge in sentimentalism." Vicente paused, pointing to the extensive plantations that stretched out of sight. "We have responsibilities, Francisco. Hundreds of families depend on this estate." Donna Joaquina brought a considerable dowry. Teresa has important connections in Rio de Janeiro. And Antonia would treat Pedro like a burden. Vicente sighed, patience escaping him like sand between fingers. Pedro would adapt. Children always adapt, it's their nature. But Francisco observed his son during these visits. He saw how Pedro withdrew, how his natural joy hid even deeper when these women were present. The boy seemed to intuit that none of them would love him genuinely, that he would merely be tolerated, a weight to be endured in exchange for social position and wealth. It was one March night, while putting Pedro to bed, that Francisco made a desperate decision. His son held his hand tightly, as if he feared his father would also leave during sleep. "Papa, are you going to marry one of them?" Pedro asked, with that precocious wisdom of children who grow up too fast. "I don't know, my son, I don't know. I don't want you to marry them," Pedro whispered. "They don't like me." That dawn, Francisco remained awake, contemplating the moon through velvet curtains. A crazy, impossible idea began to germinate in his mind. What if the answer wasn't among the aristocratic suitors? What if true love could flourish in simpler, more genuine soil? It was then that the seed of his transformation began to sprout, although he didn't know what extraordinary path his decision would lead him to follow. Francisco's study smelled of leather and tobacco, an aroma that had impregnated the walls after generations of Almeida Serrano family men making decisions that shaped the region. But never before had those walls witnessed a resolution as radical as the one germinating in the baron's mind that April morning. The drought that had devastated the Sertão since late 1882 had brought waves of refugees to the mountainous region of Minas Gerais. Entire families arrived in precarious carts, faces burned by the merciless sun, eyes marked by hope and despair. Francisco had followed the discussions in the municipal chamber about how to accommodate the needy, and it was during one of these meetings that the impossible idea crystallized. Joaquim Silva, the estate's administrator for 18 years, a 42-year-old man whose loyalty was unquestionable, stood before the mahogany desk, eyes wide with incredulity. "What do you intend to do, Baron?" Joaquim murmured, as if the words were too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Francisco rose, walking to the window that offered a view of the full extent of his lands. The rolling fields stretched like a green-gold sea, dotted by the workers' white houses and corrals, where cattle grazed peacefully. It was his kingdom, his responsibility, his prison. "I'm going to transform myself into Francisco Santos, a widowed refugee from the drought," he explained with a serene voice as if discussing the price of coffee. "I'll rent a simple house in Santa Clara do Valle. Pedro and I will live like common people, honest workers seeking a fresh start." Joaquim rubbed his face with trembling hands. "But, sir, that's impossible. How will you explain the Baron Francisco's disappearance and the estate's administration, the business with the capital?" "You'll take care of everything, Joaquim. You'll say I traveled to Europe for health reasons, lung treatment. Nothing uncommon among aristocrats. Vicente will temporarily assume the capital business as he always has." The administrator began pacing in circles, gesturing nervously. "And how long do you intend to maintain this charade?" Francisco contemplated Donna Isabel's portrait above the fireplace, her sweet eyes that seemed to silently approve his crazy decision, the time necessary to find a true mother for Pedro, a woman who will love him for what he is, not for what I represent. But sir, what will happen when they discover your true identity? The village people aren't fools. Hope that when that happens, I'll have already found what I'm looking for. Francisco smiled for the first time in weeks. Joaquim, how many times have you told me that married workers are happier, more productive? Always, sir. Our united family is the foundation of everything. Then I need to discover how to form a truly united family, not just a convenient arrangement between titles and properties. The afternoon was spent in meticulous preparations. Francisco chose simple clothes, stored since his youth when he disguised himself for village adventures. Joaquim, still reluctant, provided the necessary documentation. Francisco Santos, 28-year-old widower, necessary lie to appear younger, carpenter by profession, refugee from the Canudos region where drought had destroyed his small property. The chosen house was on the outskirts of Santa Clara do Vale, near the river that cut through the small city. It was a simple construction of adobe and colonial tiles, with 3 rooms and a small yard where Pedro could play. The rent would be paid through Joaquim, who would invent a story about needy relatives. When the time came to leave, Francisco wore rough cotton pants, a simple shirt, and a straw hat that partially shadowed his aristocratic face. Pedro, at 6 years old, saw everything as a great adventure, enchanted with the idea of living in a tiny house like in fairy tales. "It's like we're characters in a story, Papa," exclaimed the boy, jumping with joy. "It's exactly that, my son. A new story for both of us." While the simple cart moved away from San Vicente estate on the cloudy April morning, Francisco didn't look back. He knew he was leaving behind his entire identity built over 3 decades, but he carried with him the hope of finding something much more valuable, a family built on true love, not on social convenience. Behind him, Joaquim watched the cart disappear around the road's curve, shaking his head and murmuring a prayer that his master wasn't committing the greatest mistake of his privileged life. The smell of damp earth permeated the air of Santa Clara do Vale on that cloudy Monday of April. The fine rain that had fallen during dawn left the irregular cobblestone streets glistening, and Francisco Santos, as he now called himself, pushed his few belongings on a borrowed cart, while Pedro skipped beside him, fascinated by everything he saw. The village of 200 families bustled with the arrival of new drought refugees. Other men, women and children unloaded their modest possessions in hastily rented houses, and Francisco's arrival went unnoticed amid the commotion. It was exactly what he hoped for. The house he had rented was on Sacramento Street, near the San Francisco River that cut through the city like a silver ribbon. It was humble but clean, whitewashed walls, wooden plank floors, small windows that filtered the morning's golden light. Pedro ran through the 3 rooms, living room, bedroom and kitchen, as if exploring an enchanted castle. "Papa, can I plant flowers in the yard?" the boy asked, already imagining possibilities in the small plot that extended to the bamboo fence. "Of course, my son. This is our home now." The word home sounded different on Francisco's lips. Not mansion, not property, not estate headquarters, just home, simple and welcoming. Neighbors didn't take long to appear. So Manuel, owner of a small farm, was a 50-year-old man with calloused hands and a generous smile. His wife, Donna Ana, brought a basket with still warm bread and a maternal smile that made Francisco's heart tighten, seeing how Pedro responded instantly to such kindness. "Welcome, Francisco," said Sir Manuel, shaking his hand firmly. "I heard you came from the Sertão. Ugly thing, that drought, isn't it?" "We lost everything," Francisco replied, and the half-truth sounded convincing even to himself. In a way, he really had lost everything, his identity, his position, his previous life. "But here you'll start over," declared Donna Ana, kneeling to Pedro's height. "And you, little man, what's your name?" "Pedro Santos," the boy replied, and Francisco noticed how naturally his son had adopted the false name. "My papa is a carpenter." "How wonderful! We need a carpenter around here," smiled Sir Manuel. "Father Benedito was just looking for someone to fix the church benches." Father Benedito arrived the following afternoon, a 45-year-old man with graying hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. He was the village's progressive priest, known for teaching poor children to read and for his advanced ideas about popular education. "I heard about the new carpenter," said the priest, examining Francisco's hands with attention. "Well-cared hands for someone who works with wood." Francisco felt a chill. Would he be discovered so quickly? My wife insisted I use balm, he improvised. She said rough hands aren't good for caressing children. The explanation seemed to satisfy the priest, who smiled and knelt before Pedro. And you, my son, can you read? A little, Pedro replied shyly. My teacher left when Papa lost his money. Well, we'll have to solve that here, declared Father Benedito. Every child has the right to education, rich or poor. Francisco felt a stab of irony. His son, heir to one of the region's greatest fortunes, would be educated in the poor school, and perhaps that was exactly what Pedro needed, to socialize with other children, away from aristocratic isolation. The first week passed quickly. Francisco settled into the simple routine: wake with the sun, drink black coffee with brown sugar, walk to the improvised workshop in the yard, where he repaired furniture and small wooden objects. His hands, accustomed to holding pens and papers, ached with manual work, but there was a strange satisfaction in that honest pain. Pedro flourished like a plant that had finally found adequate soil. He befriended refugee children: Joãozinho, son of farmers; Maria Clara, whose parents were weavers; Antonio, an orphan cared for by an aunt. They ran together through cobblestone streets, fished in the river, helped with small domestic tasks without complaint. At night, father and son sat on the small porch to observe the stars. Pedro talked about the day's adventures, eyes shining with a vivacity Francisco hadn't seen in years. "Papa, I'm enjoying being poor," the boy declared one Friday night, causing an involuntary smile in his father. "Why, my son? Because now I have real friends, and people smile when they see us." Francisco embraced his son, understanding that his crazy decision might not be so crazy after all. But he still hadn't found what he truly sought: a woman who could genuinely love Pedro, who would bring into their lives the maternal tenderness that was missing. It was on a Saturday morning, carrying wood for a school repair, that destiny would finally reveal its plan. A young woman walked toward him, carrying a heavy basket, and something in her delicate and determined gestures made Francisco's heart beat faster. He didn't yet know, but he was about to encounter Rosa Santos. Saturday morning dawned clear and golden when Francisco walked along Flower Street, carrying his toolbox toward the school where he would repair damaged desks. Dew still pearled the yard foliage, and the air carried the mixed perfume of jasmine and fresh coffee that characterized Santa Clara de Vale's dawns. It was then that he saw her. Rosa Santos walked in the opposite direction, carrying a wicker basket that seemed too heavy for her delicate arms. She wore a simple indigo cotton dress, her dark chestnut hair pulled into a disheveled bun from which rebellious strands escaped, dancing in the morning breeze. But it was her eyes that paralyzed Francisco. Chestnut and deep, they reflected a mixture of determination and tenderness that touched him instantly. "Allow me to help you," Francisco offered, approaching and noticing the basket was full of small bottles and medicinal herbs. Rosa raised her gaze, studying him for a moment. There was caution in her expression, but also kindness. "You're very kind, sir." "Francisco Santos." "And you are?" "Rosa Santos," she smiled, and Francisco felt as if the morning sun became even brighter. What a coincidence in names, don't you think? Perhaps it's not a coincidence. Francisco took the basket, noting it really weighed more than it appeared. "Where are you headed?" "To Donna Esperanza's house on Travessa do Pocho. She's had a fever since yesterday and needs these remedies." They walked side by side through irregular cobblestone streets. Francisco discreetly observed Rosa's profile, the way she greeted acquaintances along the way, how she stopped to pet a stray cat or inquire about a child's health. There was a naturalness in caring for others that impressed him. "You're new to the village," Rosa observed. It wasn't a question but a statement. "Arrived with the latest group of refugees?" "Yes. My son and I lost everything in the drought. We came to try starting over. I'm sorry for your loss." The compassion in her voice was genuine. "But you'll be fine here. Santa Clara de Vale welcomes well those who arrive with hearts ready for work." They stopped before a small whitewashed house. Rosa knocked gently, and soon an elderly woman appeared, face reddened by fever. "Rosa, child, how good that you came," sighed Donna Esperanza. "I brought guaco tea and echinacea tincture." Rosa opened the basket, organizing the bottles carefully. "Take the tea every 2 hours, and 3 drops of tincture before meals." Francisco watched, fascinated by Rosa's competence in handling medications, the precise instructions she gave, the affection with which she touched the sick woman's forehead to check her fever. "Where did you learn about medicine?" he asked when they left the house. From Father Benedito. He was a military chaplain in the Paraguayan War, learned much about treating wounds and diseases. When he arrived here 7 years ago, he taught me what he knew. And why did you decide to learn? Rosa stopped walking, contemplating the distant mountains that framed the village like sleeping giants. Because I lost my parents in a yellow fever epidemic 7 years ago. If I had known then what I know now. Her voice slightly broke. Anyway, I decided I wouldn't let anyone else leave for lack of adequate care, if I could prevent it. Francisco felt deep admiration growing in his chest. That woman had transformed her personal pain into service to others, had found in caring for others the cure for her own wound. "Do you have family here?" he asked, hoping the answer would be no. "I have a girl." Rosa hesitated. "Maria. She's 4 years old." Francisco's heart raced. A daughter. Rosa had a daughter and hadn't mentioned a husband. And the girl's father? "There is no father." The answer came dry, definitive, and Francisco perceived he had touched sensitive territory. They walked in silence for some moments, Francisco processing the information. Rosa was a single mother, a delicate situation in a conservative society like 1883's. This explained her initial caution, the way she carefully chose words. "My son Pedro is 6 years old," Francisco said gently. "Lost his mother in childbirth. Sometimes I think he needs more maternal affection than I can offer." Rosa stopped again, looking into his eyes with an intensity that disarmed him. "Losing one's mother is the worst thing that can happen to a child," she murmured, "and caring alone for a child. I know how difficult it is. Perhaps," Francisco swallowed hard, gathering courage, "perhaps our children could play together someday. Pedro needs friends, and I imagine Maria does too." A slow, luminous smile illuminated Rosa's face. "I think Maria would like that very much. She's shy with strangers, but loves other children." "Then it's agreed?" Francisco felt like a teenager asking for his first date. "It's agreed, Señor Francisco Santos." When they separated at the corner of Sacramento Street, Francisco walked home with a lighter heart than he had felt in years. He didn't yet know that Rosa kept secrets of her own, nor that the path to winning her trust would be more complex than he imagined, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just met the woman who would change his life forever. The first weeks of new life in Santa Clara del Valle brought Francisco daily discoveries about Rosa Santos. She appeared at the most unexpected moments, carrying vegetables for a needy family, teaching a group of children to read under the jacaranda's shade in the square, or tending to some wound with the competence of a trained nurse. Pedro had quickly befriended Maria, a 4-year-old girl with curly hair and large eyes who spoke little but smiled constantly. The children played together by the river's edge, while Rosa and Francisco conversed, discovering affinities that surprised them. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Francisco discovered Rosa's first secret. He was walking along Travessa das Amendoeiras when he heard a female voice singing a lullaby. The melody, sweet and melancholic, floated through the half-open window of a small house painted egg yellow. He approached discreetly and recognized Rosa's voice. Through the window's gaps, he saw her sitting in a rocking chair, cradling Maria in her arms. But that wasn't what intrigued him. It was the scene's intimacy, the absolute affection with which Rosa kissed the girl's forehead, as if she were her true daughter, not just... Wait. Francisco frowned. Rosa always referred to Maria as the girl I care for, or simply Maria. She had never said, my daughter, and now, observing them together, he saw a physical resemblance he hadn't noticed before. The same expressive eyes, the same delicate chin shape. "Maria isn't your biological daughter, is she?" he asked her the next day, when they walked through the morning market. Rosa stiffened, almost dropping the vegetable basket she carried. "Why do you ask that?" "By the way you speak of her, always as if she were a responsibility you assumed, not a daughter you bore." Rosa stopped walking, took a deep breath, and looked toward the distant mountains. "Maria was Clarice's daughter, my best friend. Clarice died in the same epidemic that took my parents. Maria was only 6 months old. I couldn't leave her in São João del Rei's orphanage, so you adopted her, informally. In the law's eyes, I'm just her guardian, but in my heart," Rosa smiled tenderly, "in my heart, she's my daughter." Francisco felt even greater admiration for that woman. Orphaned at 16, she had assumed the responsibility of raising a child, giving up her own youth to provide love and stability to Maria. "And why do you hide this?" he asked gently. "Because in a small town, tongues are sharp," Rosa lowered her voice. If people knew Maria isn't my blood daughter, that I raised her alone from infancy, they'd say, I'm an adventurer, a woman without family who takes advantage of situations. It's already difficult enough being a single woman with a child. Francisco understood. In 1883, women needed masculine protection, father, husband, brother. A woman alone with a child was viewed with suspicion, regardless of circumstances. There's another reason, Rosa continued, hesitant. Maria doesn't know the full truth about her origin. She calls me Mama, believes I'm her true mother. How could I explain that her blood mother died and that I'm just the woman who loves and raised her as her own daughter? Francisco interrupted. Rosa, that's not just anything. That's everything. They walked in silence for some moments, processing the conversation. Francisco thought about the situation's irony. He hid wealth while Rosa hid poverty. Both pretended to be what they weren't, for different reasons. There's something more, Rosa murmured, and Francisco perceived the worst was yet to come. I have debts, many debts. What kind of debts? 450,000 reis, inheritance from the epidemic time, my parents' medical costs, medicines for Maria when she got sick, a loan I took to buy the house where we live. The creditor is Colonel Antonio Ferreira from the farm neighboring the Almeida Serrano lands. Francisco almost choked. Colonel Ferreira was his neighbor, a man he'd known since childhood, and 450,000 reis was a considerable sum for a simple woman, but one he could pay without blinking. When does the debt come due? Next December. If I can't pay, I'll lose the house. Maria and I will have to move to San Juan del Rey, where I can get work as a seamstress in a textile factory. Francisco felt his heart tighten. Losing Rosa and Maria would mean losing the happiness he had begun to glimpse for Pedro and himself. But how could he help without revealing his true identity? Rosa, perhaps I could help somehow. No, she shook her head energetically. You have your own difficulties, Francisco. We didn't come to Santa Clara do Valle to become burdens to each other, but to start over with dignity. That night, Francisco stayed awake late, contemplating the stars through his humble house's small window. Rosa was even more extraordinary than he had imagined, a woman who had raised an adopted daughter alone, who had sacrificed for an orphan child's happiness, who maintained her dignity even facing serious financial difficulties. And now he knew he had only 8 months to completely win her heart, before circumstances forced her to leave Santa Clara do Valle. Time was running out, and Francisco still didn't know how he would reveal his true identity without forever losing the trust of the woman he had learned to love. June arrived in Santa Clara do Valle, wrapped in cold mists and an omen that hung in the air like sour perfume. The first news came from travelers descending from the mountains. Cholera outbreaks were spreading through neighboring cities, and the disease walked like an invisible ghost along the roads leading to the village. Francisco observed Rosa with growing admiration during those tense days. While other people locked themselves in houses burning herbs to ward off bad airs, she traversed the streets carrying medicines, guiding families about hygiene and preventive care. All water must be boiled, she patiently explained to women gathered in the church square, and hands must be washed constantly with soap. The disease spreads through dirt and contaminated water. Pedro and Maria played together every afternoon, creating a complicity that warmed Francisco's heart. The boy, previously shy and withdrawn, had become the younger girl's protector, inventing games and stories that made her laugh with crystalline laughter. It was on a Saturday morning that tragedy knocked at the door. Francisco woke to Pedro coughing with high fever. The child complained of stomach pain and refused any food. A few meters away, in the yellow house on Travessa das Amendoeiras, Maria presented the same symptoms. Cholera, Rosa murmured when Francisco ran to her house, carrying Pedro in his arms. Both children have contracted the disease. Francisco's world collapsed. His son, his reason for living, burning with fever in the arms of a woman he couldn't yet call his own, and Maria, the sweet girl who had illuminated Pedro's life, equally ill. What do we do? He asked, voice choked with desperation. We fight, Rosa responded with iron determination. We isolate the children in the same room so they can give each other strength, and we don't leave their side for a moment. The days that followed were the longest of Francisco's life. Rosa transformed the house into an improvised infirmary, dividing her time between the two little patients with a devoted mother's dedication. She prepared lemon balm and chamomile teas to lower fever, applied cold compresses to burning foreheads, massaged small bodies with aromatic oils. Francisco watched her work and understood he was witnessing maternal love in its purest form. Rosa cared for Pedro as if he were her own son, hummed the same songs for him that she dedicated to Maria, kissed his forehead with the same tenderness. "Why do you do this?" he asked one dawn, when Rosa was taking turns between the two improvised beds. "Pedro isn't your son. Any child who needs care is my responsibility," she replied without hesitation, adjusting the blanket over the sleeping boy. "And Pedro is special. He has an old soul, sensitive. Any woman would feel honored to be his mother." Francisco felt tears welling in his eyes. This was exactly what he sought, someone who would love his son unconditionally, not out of obligation or convenience, but through pure heart connection. On the third day of illness, when the children's fever finally broke and they managed to take light broth, Francisco made a decision. "Rosa, I need to speak with you." They went to the small yard, where silver moonlight illuminated the medicinal plants Rosa cultivated with care. "I want to ask for your hand in marriage," he said without preamble. Rosa's eyes widened, remaining silent for long moments. "Francisco, you've known me for only 2 months. 2 months that showed me who you really are." Francisco took her hands, calloused from work but delicate as petals. "I saw you care for my son, as if he were yours. I saw your courage facing the disease that terrorizes the entire village. I saw your generous heart and your strength. I don't need more time to know I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. And Maria," her voice trembled, "would you accept raising a daughter who isn't yours?" "Maria would be our daughter," Francisco corrected his declaration. "Not yours, not mine, but ours. Pedro already loves her like a sister. We'll be a real family." Rosa began to cry, silent tears that flowed down her face like morning dew. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Francisco Santos. I accept marrying you." They kissed for the first time under June's full moon, sealing a commitment Francisco believed was based on genuine love. He couldn't imagine that in a few weeks his false identity would be exposed, putting to test everything he had built with such care. But that night, holding Rosa in his arms while the children slept peacefully in the adjoining room, Francisco allowed himself to dream of a future where his title didn't matter, where only love defined a family. It was a beautiful and fragile dream, about to be tested by implacable reality. The eve of Santa Clara, Duval's June festival dawned wrapped in dense fog that seemed to presage changes. It was Thursday, and Francisco woke with a light heart, thinking that in 4 days he would marry Rosa in a simple ceremony at the local church. Pedro and Maria ran through the yard, helping to pick corn for typical foods, when a familiar carriage appeared around the curve of Sacramento Street. Joaquim Silva descended from the vehicle with a grave expression, shoulders bent under the weight of bad news. Francisco felt his blood freeze in his veins, recognizing the São Vicente estate administrator. "Sir Francisco," Joaquim murmured, hesitant about how to address his disguised master, "I need to speak urgently." They entered the small house, Francisco carefully closing the door so the children wouldn't hear the conversation. Joaquim looked around, still incredulous at the simplicity of the environment where the region's richest baron lived. "Donna Catarina is gravely ill," he announced without preamble. "Doctors say it might be her heart. She constantly asks for you." Francisco felt as if the ground opened beneath his feet. His mother, at 62, had always been strong as rock. To imagine he might lose her. "And there's another problem," Joaquim continued, each word coming like a whip crack. "Your brother Vicente discovered where you are. He threatens to make a public scandal if you don't return immediately to assume your responsibilities." "How did he find out?" "One of the estate workers recognized you at last Saturday's market. Vicente is coming here today. He should arrive before nightfall." Francisco walked to the window, observing Pedro and Maria playing innocently in the yard. In a few hours, his entire false world would crumble. Rosa would discover she had lived a lie, that the humble man she had fallen in love with was actually a rich baron who had played at being poor. "Sir, with all respect," Joaquim lowered his voice, "there's still time to explain everything to the girl. She seems to have true feelings for you. Perhaps she'll understand." "Understand what?" Francisco laughed bitterly. "That I lied about my identity? That our entire relationship was built on a farce? That I played at being poor while she struggled with real debts?" The sound of voices in the street interrupted the conversation. Francisco looked through the window and saw Rosa walking toward the house, carrying a basket with wedding cake ingredients. Behind her, the entire community prepared for the June festival, decorating streets with colorful bunting. "Leave, Joaquim," Francisco asked. I need to tell Rosa the truth before Vicente arrives. But it was too late. A second carriage, this one luxurious and imposing, turned the corner of Sacramento Street. Vicente de Almeida Serrano descended from the vehicle like a conquering general, his fine clothes grotesquely contrasting with the village's simplicity. Behind him came two thugs and a scribe. The community gathered for June preparations stopped what they were doing, observing the unexpected arrival. Rosa, who was walking toward Francisco's house, froze in the middle of the street, the basket slipping from her hands and spilling ingredients on the stone floor. Francisco de Almeida Serrano, Vicente's voice echoed through the silent street. Baron of San Vicente, stop this ridiculous farce immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. All heads turned to Francisco, who remained paralyzed at the door's threshold. Pedro ran to his father, confused and frightened, while Maria hid behind Rosa. Francisco, Rosa whispered, voice broken. Francisco Santos doesn't exist, does he? Vicente approached, gesturing theatrically. This man is Francisco de Almeida Serrano, Baron of San Vicente, owner of the region's largest estate. He played at being poor, deceived all of you. It's not true, Papa. Pedro pulled at his father's pants. Say it's not true. But Francisco couldn't deny it. Rosa's eyes met his, and in them he saw not just betrayal but something much worse, profound disappointment. You lied, she murmured, tears beginning to flow. About everything. About who you are, about your life, about accepting Maria as a daughter. It was all aboard rich man's game. Rosa, no. Francisco tried to approach. Don't come near me. She retreated, protecting Maria against her chest. I thought you loved me. I thought Pedro needed a mother. But you're rich. You don't need anything or anyone. The crowd murmured, some people indignant, others curious. So Manuel and Donna Ana looked at Francisco with hurt expressions, as if they had been betrayed by a dear friend. Enough of this buffoonery, Vicente declared loudly. Francisco, you have 2 hours to bid farewell to these people and return with me to the estate. Your mother is dying and you're here playing house with this common woman. The offense struck Rosa like a slap. She raised her chin with wounded dignity, picked up Maria, and walked toward her house without looking back. Rosa, please, Francisco shouted, running after her. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. She stopped at the house door, turning one last time. You're a liar, and I'm a fool who believed someone could truly love me. The door closed with a crash that echoed through Francisco's heart like a gunshot. Pedro began to cry, embracing his father's legs. Papa, why is Aunt Rosa angry? Did we do something wrong? Vicente approached, placing his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Don't worry, Pedro. We'll return home, where everything will go back to normal. But Francisco knew nothing would ever be normal again. He had lost the woman he loved, destroyed his son's happiness, and betrayed the trust of an entire community that had welcomed him as family. As the carriage moved away from Santa Clara de Vale in the sunny afternoon, Francisco looked back one last time. Rosa was at her house window, watching them leave. Even at distance, he could see tears on her face, and he knew he would carry that image engraved in his heart for the rest of his life. San Vicente Estate rose on the horizon like a ghost from Francisco's past. The 40-room mansion, tall windows reflecting the setting sun, meticulously maintained gardens. Everything seemed strange and cold after 2 months living in Santa Clara de Vale's simplicity. Pedro walked beside his father in silence, small steps echoing in the marble corridors. The boy looked around with eyes that had lost the brightness discovered in the village's simple house, as if he instinctively understood he had returned to a golden prison. Vicente led them directly to Donna Caterina's chambers. The family matriarch was reclined in an imposing carved mahogany bed, surrounded by doctors and servants. At 62 years old, she remained haughty even in illness, white hair arranged with perfection, dark eyes still penetrating. Mother, Francisco knelt beside the bed, holding the fragile hand that once commanded that entire property. Francisco, her voice came weak, but charged with emotion. My lost son. Why did you do this to us? Vicente remained standing in the room's corner, arms crossed with a severe expression. He dishonored our lineage, Mother, pretending to be poor, promising marriage to some village woman, exposing our name to ridicule. Vicente, Donna Caterina slightly raised her head. Leave us alone. When they were alone, just Francisco, Pedro, and the ailing matriarch, silence weighed like molten lead. Pedro timidly approached the bed, touching his grandmother's hand with delicacy. "Grandma, are you very sick?" he asked with children's cruel honesty. "I'm tired, my boy, very tired," Donna Caterina smiled weakly. "But tell me, were you happy in the village?" Pedro looked at his father as if asking permission to be honest. "You can tell the truth, my son," Francisco encouraged. "I was very happy, Grandma. I had friends, played in the street, Aunt Rosa took care of me when I got sick, and Maria was going to be my little sister." "Rosa," Donna Caterina repeated the name slowly. "Tell me about her." Francisco hesitated, but words began to flow like dammed water finally finding outlet. "She's extraordinary, mother. Orphaned since 16, raised an adopted girl alone, cares for the village sick, teaches poor children to read. She has an inner strength I never saw in any of the aristocratic suitors you and Vicente presented to me. And do you love her? More than my own life. And did she know who you were?" "No. She fell in love with Francisco Santos, a poor carpenter. When she discovered the truth," Francisco's voice broke. "She hates me now. She thinks it was all a cruel joke." Donna Caterina closed her eyes, breathing with difficulty. "I lost 3 children besides you two," she murmured after long silence. "Eduardo dead in infancy, Luisa taken by yellow fever, Gabriel lost in the Paraguayan War. I know what it is to feel the pain of losing someone you love. Mother, don't make me lose what remains of our family through foolish pride, Francisco. If you love that woman, if Pedro was happy with her, then perhaps I was wrong about what truly matters in life." The door burst open, Vicente entering like a hurricane. "Mother, you can't be serious. He abandoned his responsibilities, lied to a plebeian woman, exposed our name." "Vicente," Donna Caterina interrupted with authority that illness couldn't diminish. "Have you ever married for love? Marriage isn't about love, it's about alliances, properties, lineage. And are you happy?" Vicente opened and closed his mouth, finding no answer. "I thought that way my entire life," the matriarch continued. "I married your father for convenience, raised you following social rules, maintained family traditions. And now, sick and perhaps near death, I wonder, what good did all that concern with appearances do if my children aren't genuinely happy?" Francisco felt a knot in his throat. He had never heard his mother speak with such vulnerability and wisdom. "What are you suggesting?" Vicente asked, visibly disturbed. "That Francisco go find this Rosa and bring her here. I want to meet the woman who conquered my son's heart and cared for my grandson as if he were hers." "And if she doesn't want to come?" Francisco asked, hope fighting against despair. "If she never forgives me? Then you'll have to prove you've truly changed." Donna Caterina squeezed her son's hand. "Not with words or expensive gifts, but with actions. Show her that the man who fell in love with her still exists, even under a baron's title." Pedro, who had listened to everything in silence, approached his grandmother. "Grandma, if Papa brings Aunt Rosa and Maria here, will you like them?" Donna Caterina kissed her grandson's forehead. "Anyone who made you smile like you're smiling now, my boy, has already conquered my heart." Vicente left the room slamming the door, but Francisco barely noticed. For the first time in weeks he felt a spark of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps he could still reconquer the love his lie had destroyed. But first, he would need to prove to Rosa that Francisco Santos and Francisco de Almeida Serrano were the same person, a man who had learned the true meaning of love and family away from his class's privileges. The most difficult mission of his life was about to begin. The weeks following Francisco's return to San Vicente estate were marked by transformations that shook the region's entire social structure. The Baron, determined to prove his inner change was genuine, implemented reforms that caused commotion among traditional landowners. The first change came in the work system. Francisco abolished payment only in provisions and began offering money wages to estate workers. The second was even more radical. He built a school for employees' children, hiring a teacher trained in the capital to teach children to read. But it was creating the cooperative for purchasing seeds and tools that provoked the most violent reaction from neighboring farmers. Colonel Antonio Ferreira, a 50-year-old man known for conservative rigidity, appeared at San Vicente estate one August morning, accompanied by Major Benedito Carvalho and other regional landowners. "Francisco, have you lost your mind?" the colonel declared without ceremony, entering the library where Francisco examined the cooperative's accounting books. "Paying workers money wages, education for plebeian children, and now this cooperative. You're inciting dangerous Republican ideas." Francisco rose calmly. offering chairs to visitors who remained standing, flaunting their indignation. "Colonel Ferreira, I'm merely ensuring better conditions for families working on my land." "Better conditions?" Major Carvalho gestured nervously. "You're giving them ideas above their social station. Soon they'll be demanding rights, questioning authority." Colonel Ferreira approached the table, resting his hands on the cooperative papers. "And this story circulating through the region, that you disguised yourself as poor to court a village woman. Is this true?" "It's true," Francisco replied without hesitation. "Then you've completely lost your mind." The major shook his head. "Men of our class don't play at being poor, Francisco. We have responsibilities, traditions to maintain." "And what traditions are those?" Francisco crossed his arms. "Keeping people in ignorance, paying with flour and beans so they never have money to buy their own land, perpetuating a system that benefits only some while many can barely survive. That system maintains order." Colonel Ferreira pounded his fist on the table. "Your modern ideas will destroy everything our ancestors built." The discussion was interrupted by Vicente's arrival, who entered the library with a worried expression. "Francisco, we need to talk." "In private." The visitors left, promising to return with appropriate measures to contain what they called dangerous revolution at São Vicente estate. When alone, Vicente walked to the window, observing workers building the new school. "They're organizing a boycott against us," he announced bluntly. "Colonel Ferreira convinced other landowners not to sell cattle to our estate, nor buy our production. And are you afraid?" "I'm afraid your romantic ideas will destroy businesses that took generations to build." Vicente turned to his brother. "Francisco, I understand you want to impress that village woman." "Rosa," Francisco interrupted. "Her name is Rosa. I understand you want to impress Rosa, but there are limits to what we can do without destroying our social position." Francisco walked to the bookshelf, picked up a volume on political philosophy, and leafed through it distractedly. "Vicente, have you ever asked our workers if they're happy? Happiness isn't a question for workers. It's a question for people like us who have education and resources." "That's what we were always taught, but I lived 2 months as Francisco Santos, Vicente. I met families who, even in poverty, were more united and cheerful than many aristocratic families. I saw poor children more emotionally educated than barons' sons raised by governesses." Vicente approached his brother, lowering his voice. "And if they're right, if your reforms really cause a revolution, Republican winds blow strong since Dom Pedro II weakened. Do you want to be responsible for accelerating changes that could destroy our class?" Francisco closed the book and looked directly into his brother's eyes. "I want to be responsible for changes that create a more just society, and if that means our class will have to adapt, then let it adapt. And if Rosa never forgives you? If all this sacrifice is in vain?" The question struck Francisco like a dagger. It was the doubt that tormented him every night, when he lay in the mansion's cold bed thinking of the woman he loved, alone in her yellow house on Travessa das Amendoeiras. "Then at least I'll have done what's right," he finally responded, "and Pedro will grow up knowing his father had courage to change, even when it was difficult." That night, Francisco went up to his son's room and found him awake, looking through the window toward the mountains that hid Santa Clara do Val. "Papa, when are we going to visit Aunt Rosa and Maria?" Pedro asked with children's innocent hope. "Soon, my son, very soon." But Francisco knew there was still a long road ahead. He needed not only to prove his transformation to Rosa, but also face resistance from an entire society that saw his changes as threats to established order. The battle for a different future was just beginning. 8 weeks had passed since the devastating revelation in Santa Clara do Val, and Francisco knew he couldn't wait any longer. Donna Catarina, though slightly better, remained fragile, and separation from Rosa corroded his soul like acid. The decision came on a golden September morning, when Pedro came down for breakfast crying silently, a habit he had developed since returning to the mansion. "Mother," Francisco addressed the matriarch who was having tea on the back terrace, "I want you to accompany me to Santa Clara do Val." Donna Catarina raised an elegant eyebrow. "Me? A sick 62-year-old woman, going to ask forgiveness from a village girl?" "Exactly. I want Rosa to see that my family genuinely accepts her, that our change is real, not performative." Vicente, who was reading newspapers in a nearby armchair, looked up with a horrified expression. "Have you gone insane? The matriarch of the Almeida Serranos visiting a... Careful with your words, Vicente," Francisco warned with a dangerous voice. Donna Catarina placed her cup on the saucer with studied delicacy. "Actually, Vicente, I think that's exactly what we should do. If this woman managed to awaken so much love in my son and brought joy to my grandson, she deserves to be treated with respect by our entire family. The trip to Santa Clara Duval was made in a simple carriage, without coats of arms or ornamentations that would call attention. Donna Caterina, despite her age and recent illness, maintained erect posture and the determined gaze of someone who had made an important decision. "Francisco," she spoke during the journey, "what do you plan to tell her? The truth, that I fell in love genuinely, that it was never a game, that I want to spend the rest of my life proving my love. And if she doesn't believe you?" Francisco contemplated the familiar landscape stretching through the carriage windows. "Then I'll have to accept her decision. But I can't give up without trying." They arrived in Santa Clara Duval on a Thursday afternoon, when the village lived the week's unhurried rhythm. Francisco drove the carriage directly to Travessa das Amenderas, stopping before the yellow house that had become the center of his dreams and nightmares. Rosa was in the yard, hanging clothes on the line, when she heard the wheel's noise on stone. She turned and froze, seeing Francisco descending from the carriage, followed by an elegant lady with white hair. "Rosa," Francisco approached slowly, as if she were a frightened bird ready to fly. "This is my mother, Donna Caterina de Almeida Serrano. She asked to meet you." Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, clearly nervous. She had grown thinner in recent weeks, cheekbones more prominent, but remained beautiful with that natural dignity Francisco so admired. "Lady Baroness," Rosa made a respectful curtsy, "it's an honor to receive you in my humble home." "The pleasure is mine, my dear." Donna Caterina approached with a genuine smile. "May I call you Rosa? Francisco spoke so much about you that I feel as if we already know each other." "Of course, madam." Maria appeared at the door, hiding behind her adoptive mother's skirts. Donna Caterina knelt with difficulty, reaching the girl's height. "And you must be Maria. What a beautiful girl. Pedro talks about you every day." "Where is Pedro?" Maria asked shyly. "He's at the estate, missing you." Donna Caterina smiled. "Would you like to see him again?" Maria nodded, but looked to Rosa for approval. "May we talk?" Francisco asked. "There are important things I need to say." Rosa hesitated, then invited them in. The small house, with its 3 simple rooms, contrasted dramatically with the mansion's luxury, but Donna Caterina looked around with genuine approval. "What a welcoming house," she commented, sitting in the wooden chair Rosa offered. "One can feel the love that exists here." "Lady Baroness," Rosa began, voice formal and controlled, "if you came to offer money or compensation for what happened, it won't be necessary. I hold no grudge." "Rosa," Francisco intervened, "we didn't come to offer money. We came to ask for a second chance." Rosa's eyes met his, and Francisco saw in them a complex mixture of pain, longing, and distrust. "Second chance for what? To lie to me again? To prove that my feelings were always true?" Francisco knelt before her, ignoring his mother's presence. "Rosa, in every moment we spent together, I never pretended what I felt for you. The love was real, the affection for Maria was genuine, the desire to form a family was sincere. But you lied about who you were." "I lied about my identity, but never about my heart." Donna Caterina interfered gently. "Rosa, may I speak as a mother and grandmother?" Francisco made a mistake hiding his identity, but he did it for a reason that, though misguided, was noble. He wanted to find a woman who would love him for who he is, not for what he possesses. "And now?" Rosa asked, tears beginning to form. "What has changed?" "Everything," Francisco replied. "I changed how I treat estate workers, created a school for their children, implemented fair wages. I want you to see that I learned from our time together, that I became a better man. And if I accept, what would happen to Maria and me? Would we live on the estate as dependents on your kindness?" "You would live as my wife and our daughter," Francisco corrected, "with all the rights and dignity that represents. And Rosa, I want you to continue your work, caring for the sick and teaching children. I'm going to build a school in the village and a small hospital. You'll be the director of both." Rosa remained silent for long moments, tears flowing down her face. "I need time to think," she finally murmured. "All this is very sudden." "As much time as you need." Francisco stood up. "We'll be staying at Donna Julia's boarding house. When you decide, look for me." Before leaving, Donna Caterina held Rosa's hands. "My dear, I know my son hurt you, but I can see in your eyes that you still love him. Don't let wounded pride destroy a chance at true happiness." When they left, Francisco carried in his chest a mixture of hope and terror. Rosa hadn't completely rejected him, but she hadn't forgiven him either. The future of his happiness would depend entirely on the decision of that extraordinary woman he had learned to love in her purest form. Sunday, September 1883, dawned with a crystalline blue sky that seemed to reflect renewed hope in Santa Clara de Val. Rosa had spent 3 days in silent reflection, walking along the riverbanks and having long conversations with Father Benedito about forgiveness, second chances, and the nature of true love. It was Saturday morning when she finally sought Francisco at Donna Julia's boarding house. "I accept marrying you," she said simply, hands intertwined over the blue dress she had saved for special occasions. "But I have conditions." Francisco, who hadn't slept properly for 3 nights, rose from the bench where he waited in the boarding house garden. "Any conditions you want? First, Maria will be legally adopted as your daughter, with all inheritance rights that implies. I've already arranged the papers. Father Benedito helped us with documentation. Second, I want religious and civil marriage, in church before God and at the registry before the law. It will be done. Third, I don't want to live in the big mansion. It's too much for me, too ostentatious. I want a smaller house on the estate, where we can be a normal family." Francisco smiled for the first time in weeks. "I've already chosen the location, near the stream that cuts through the property with mountain views, 12 rooms instead of 40. And fourth condition," Rosa took a deep breath, "I want to continue working in the village, caring for the sick, teaching children. I can't abandon people who depend on me." "Rosa, it would be an honor to have a wife who dedicates her life to helping others." Donna Caterina, who was watching the conversation from the boarding house window, came down to embrace her future daughter-in-law. "Welcome to the family, my dear, and thank you for forgiving my foolish son." News of the wedding spread through the village like waves on a calm lake. The community, initially shocked by the revelation of Francisco's identity, began accepting the situation when they learned of changes he had implemented on the estate and plans to build a school and hospital in the village. Seu Manuel and Donna Ana were the first to offer help with preparations. "Rosa's wedding deserves a worthy celebration," declared Donna Ana, already planning the banquet. The chosen Sunday became the most special day in Santa Clara do Vale's recent history. The small church, decorated with wildflowers picked by village children, received not only the bride and groom, but an entire community celebrating the union of 2 seemingly incompatible worlds. Rosa walked to the altar wearing her mother's wedding dress, adjusted by her own hands. The simple silk fabric, ivory-colored, enhanced her natural beauty. Maria, as flower girl, scattered rose petals along the path, while Pedro, proud, carried the rings. Francisco waited at the altar, wearing a simple suit without ostentation, hands slightly trembling with emotion. Beside him, Father Benedito smiled with the satisfaction of one who unites 2 people who genuinely love each other. "Dear brothers," the priest began, "we're here to celebrate not just Francisco and Rosa's union, but also the formation of a new family. A family built on love, forgiveness, and mutual commitment." During the vows, Francisco looked into Rosa's eyes and spoke with a clear voice. "Rosa, I promise to love you as you deserve to be loved. I promise to be a dedicated father to Maria, as she deserves to have. I promise to use my resources not to show off but to serve. And I promise never again to lie about who I am, because I learned I'm a better man when I'm by your side." Rosa, with tears in her eyes, responded, "Francisco, I promise to forgive your past and build our future together. I promise to love Pedro as my own son. I promise to be your companion in any difficulty. And I promise to help you always be the good man I discovered under all your masks." After the religious ceremony, everyone went to the registry, where the county judge performed the civil ceremony. It was during this second ceremony that the most emotional moment occurred: Maria's legal adoption. "Maria Santos," the judge called the girl, who approached timidly. "From today you're called Maria de Almeida Serrano, legitimate daughter of Francisco and Rosa de Almeida Serrano." The girl looked at Francisco with big eyes and asked, "Now you're really my papa, forever my princess." Pedro hugged his new sister, whispering, "Now we're a complete family." The celebration that followed was different from any the region had ever witnessed. Held in the village's central square, it brought together estate aristocrats and humble residents in a fellowship that symbolized the changes Francisco had implemented. Vicente, who initially had resisted the wedding, approached his brother during the celebration. "Perhaps you were right," he admitted, watching Francisco dance with Rosa while children ran among guests. "I've never seen you so happy." Donna Caterina, seated in a chair decorated like an improvised throne, held a special package in her arms. "Rosa, my dear," she called her daughter-in-law, "I have a wedding gift for you." Inside the package were deeds to land in the village near the school. "For your hospital," explained Donna Caterina. "Every true doctor needs their own place to work." When the celebration ended, Francisco and Rosa walked hand in hand to the new house he had built near the stream. It was simple but cozy, with a garden where children could play and views of the mountains that had witnessed their love. "I can't believe it's real," Rosa murmured, leaning on the bedroom windowsill. "Believe it," Francisco embraced her from behind. "This is our life now. Our family, our house, our future." That night, while Pedro and Maria slept in the rooms Francisco had prepared especially for each, the newlyweds contemplated stars and planned the years to come. They were about to discover that the best of their story was yet to happen. The months following the wedding brought transformations that reverberated far beyond São Vicente estate's limits. Francisco and Rosa, working as a team, created a rural property model that drew attention from the entire province. The school Francisco had built in the village quickly became a regional reference. Rosa, now officially director, implemented innovative pedagogical methods that included mixed education, boys and girls studying together, and practical classes combining literacy with agricultural and health knowledge. "It's the region's first mixed school," Father Benedito commented with pride, observing children working in groups where landowners' sons studied alongside rural workers' children. Pedro, now 7, and Maria, 5, were living examples of the harmony Francisco and Rosa had built. The children studied at the village school in the morning and returned home to the estate in the afternoon, where they helped with domestic chores without distinction between boss's son and adopted daughter. The small hospital Rosa directed functioned in a single-story building near the river, equipped with basic medicines and a 6-bed infirmary. Techniques she had learned from Father Benedito, combined with medical knowledge obtained through books Francisco ordered from the capital, but it was the social impact of changes that most impressed observers. Vicente, initially resistant to his brother's innovations, began implementing similar reforms on his properties. "Workers are more productive," he admitted in a family conversation at Christmas 1883. "When they have decent wages and their children study, they work with more dedication." Francisco's revolution's influence expanded when other young regional landowners began visiting São Vicente estate to learn about the cooperative system and social innovations. Joaquim Silva, the loyal administrator, became an expert in explaining changes to curious visitors. "The secret," he would say, "is treating workers as partners, not as simple employees. When they see their children have better futures, they invest everything in the land." Rosa, for her part, organized a group of village women who met weekly to learn basic nursing techniques. The knowledge she shared saved lives and drastically reduced infant mortality cases in the region. "Every mother should know how to recognize symptoms of serious diseases," she taught during meetings held at the hospital. "Medical education can't be a privilege only for capital city doctors." Francisco discovered an unsuspected vocation for political education. He organized monthly debates where social and economic questions were discussed, along with the winds of change blowing through the country. The Republican movement was gaining strength, and São Vicente estate became a meeting point for progressive discussions. "Slavery abolition is inevitable," Francisco declared during one of these meetings. "The question is whether we'll be part of the solution or be dragged along by changes." In fact, Francisco was one of the first regional landowners to formally free his few remaining slaves, offering them wages and houses on the property for those who wished to stay. Donna Caterina recovered from the illness that nearly took her, found new purpose supervising an orphanage Rosa established in a wing of the new house. The matriarch, previously concerned only with aristocratic traditions, discovered joy in caring for abandoned children. "I never thought my final years would be the most gratifying," she confessed to her daughter-in-law one Sunday afternoon, watching orphaned children playing in the garden. Tensions with conservative landowners gradually diminished when it became clear that Francisco's innovations resulted in prosperity, not social chaos. Colonel Ferreira, initially the fiercest critic, was the first to ask for advice on implementing schools on his lands. "Perhaps the boy was right," he grumbled during a municipal chamber meeting. Educated workers are more efficient workers. The most significant transformation occurred in Pedro's own personality. The boy, previously shy and melancholic, flourished into a confident and compassionate young man. At 7 years old, he already demonstrated natural leadership among school children and genuine interest in the region's social problems. "Papa," he asked one night while Francisco tucked him in, "when I grow up, will I also take care of people like you do?" "If you want to, my son, but you'll have choices I never had. You'll be able to decide what kind of man you want to be." Maria, meanwhile, developed a passion for medicine that enchanted Rosa. The 5-year-old helped at the hospital, learning names of medicinal plants and demonstrating natural skill in caring for simple wounds. "This girl will be a doctor," Rosa prophesied. "She'll be the region's first female doctor. And Pedro will be a leader," Francisco added, "but a leader who serves, not who dominates." Sunday nights became family tradition. Francisco, Rosa, Pedro, and Maria would sit on the new house's porch to contemplate stars and plan the week's projects. It was in these moments that Francisco completely understood the magnitude of transformation he had undergone. 2 years earlier, he was a solitary baron, rich but empty, concerned only with traditions and appearances. Now, he was a complete man, beloved husband, dedicated father, responsible landowner and agent of social change. "Rosa," he said on one of those September nights in 1884, "you saved not just me, but this entire region." "We saved each other," she replied, intertwining her fingers with his, "and now we're saving the future of the next generations." Francisco looked at the children sleeping peacefully, at the school glowing under moonlight, at workers' houses where entire families had hope for a better tomorrow. She was right. It wasn't just a love story they had written together. It was the story of a new society being built on foundations of dignity, education, and social justice. The morning of May 13th, 1885, dawned golden and promising over Santa Clara do Valle. Francisco woke to Rosa's gentle movement as she rose from bed, her delicate hand caressing the belly that was beginning to grow with their 3rd pregnancy. "How do you feel today?" he asked, watching her walk to the window that offered a view of the entire transformed property. "Strong," Rosa replied with a smile. "Ready for the big day." It was the day of the local abolition festival. Francisco had been one of the region's first landowners to free his slaves, anticipating by 3 years the golden law that Princess Isabel would sign. The celebration would bring together the entire community, free workers, former slaves, progressive landowners, and children from the school Rosa directed. Pedro, now 8, woke early to help with preparations. He wore simple clothes, but looked more elegant than many barons' sons in their expensive outfits. He had natural poise and a sense of social responsibility that impressed adults. "Mama Rosa," Maria called, who had turned 6 and insisted on being called that since the formal adoption. "May I help at the hospital before the festival?" "Of course, my dear." Rosa kissed her daughter's forehead. "Donna Esperanza is much better, but she likes when you bring flowers to brighten her room." The school operating in the village had grown. It now served 150 children from throughout the region, children of rural workers, former slaves, small merchants, and even some landowners' children who recognized the superior quality of education offered by Rosa and her team. Francisco walked through the facilities with the discreet pride of one who sees dreams becoming reality. The small hospital operated at full capacity, serving not only Santa Clara do Valle, but neighboring villages. Rosa had trained 6 local nurses, and they had drastically reduced infant mortality in the region. "Baron Francisco," a young voice called him. It was João, a 17-year-old former slave who now studied to be a teacher in the night school Francisco had established for adults. "João, how are your studies going?" "Very well, sir. I can already read entire books, and Senora Rosa said next year I can start teaching younger children." Francisco smiled, remembering how that same young man, 2 years before, could barely write his own name. The festival began at noon, in the central square decorated with colorful banners. School children presented a theatrical play about Brazil's history, with special emphasis on the importance of freedom and education for all. Pedro and Maria led a group of 20 children, sons and daughters of former slaves, rural workers, small merchants, and even landowners' children. They presented a performance about the Brazilian family, showing how different origins could unite in harmony. "Papa," Pedro approached after the presentation, "is it true that before some of my friends were considered people's property?" Francisco knelt to his son's height. "It's true, my son. It was an unjust system that fortunately is being overcome. And now everyone can study and choose what they want to be when they grow up. Everyone, Pedro. That's the society we want to build." Vicente, who had come from the capital especially for the festival, approached the brothers. "Francisco, I have important news. The provincial government wants to use our school as a model for other regions. And there are rumors that the emperor himself intends to visit properties that have implemented progressive social reforms." "That's secondary," Francisco replied. "What's important is that we're creating a better future for these children." Rosa approached, carrying in her arms a 2-year-old blonde girl, Clarinha, one of the orphans from the orphanage Donna Catarina administered. "Francisco, doctor." "Antonio arrived from the capital with an interesting proposal," she announced, referring to the young doctor who had become interested in working permanently in the region. "What kind of proposal?" "He wants to establish here the country's first rural medical school to train doctors specialized in serving interior populations." Francisco felt his chest swell with pride and emotion. 2 years earlier, Santa Clara do Val was just an isolated village. Now it was becoming a center of social and educational innovation. The festival continued until dusk, with music, dances, and food prepared collectively by all families. Francisco observed Rosa conversing with a group of women she had trained as nurses, Pedro playing with children from all social backgrounds, Maria lovingly caring for the younger ones. Donna Catarina, at 64, radiant with renewed health, approached her son. "Francisco, I need to confess something." "Tell me, mother." "My entire life I worried about maintaining traditions and appearances. Now I realize the only tradition worth maintaining is genuinely loving and serving others. Rosa taught me that too. Rosa taught us all." When the festival ended and families returned to their homes, Francisco, Rosa, and the children walked through the property, observing lights that lit up in free workers' houses. "Francisco," Rosa stopped near the stream that cut through the estate. "Do you remember the day we met?" "I remember. You were carrying medicines for Donna Esperanza, and you offered to help, even pretending to be someone else. Your heart was always genuine." Pedro and Maria ran ahead, chasing fireflies that danced among the plants. Francisco embraced Rosa, feeling under his hands the belly growing with their third child. "Rosa, thank you for forgiving me, for teaching me that true love transforms not just two people, but the world around them. Thank you for having courage to change," she replied, "for showing that powerful men can choose to use their power to serve, not to dominate." They stopped before the new house, where golden light emanated from the windows. It was smaller than the mansion where Francisco had grown up, but infinitely more welcoming. There they lived as a true family, built on love, forgiveness, and shared purpose. "Papa, Mama," Pedro came running. "Maria and I decided something." "What was it, my son?" "When we grow up, we want to continue taking care of people like you do. Maria's going to be a doctor, and I'm going to help build schools for all children in Brazil." Francisco and Rosa exchanged emotional glances. Their children had understood the most important lesson, that privilege without social responsibility is empty, but power used to serve can transform the world. That night, while putting the children to bed, Francisco reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. It had begun as a solitary baron pretending to be poor to find love. He had transformed into a complete man, who discovered that truly loving means dedicating life to the well-being of those we love and the community that embraces us. "Rosa," he whispered in the room's darkness, "our story ended up being bigger than love between two people." "Our story," she replied, caressing the belly where new life grew, "is about how love can rebuild the world, one family at a time." Francisco fell asleep that night, knowing he had found not only the woman of his dreams, but also his true purpose in life, and that the child who would be born in a few months would grow up in a world where human dignity, education, and social justice were not privileges, but fundamental rights. The baron who once had disguised himself as poor to find love had discovered something infinitely more valuable, that true wealth lies in the capacity to transform lives and build a better future for the next generations.